Rakrak, along with Jael and Ur and the rest of the lizards, began to swim across the lake. And soon all 80 lizards that followed their leader had reached the island. Owen was one of the first to get out of the water. He rushed straight to his cub and gave him a big hug. Watching the happy, and somewhat tearful reunion of father and son, Rakrak turned to Ur and told him to send those who were tired on the journey with their children back to the boats. And afterwards to take those who could not swim well and take them to the end of the village to attract the attention of the enemy, who must now be watching closely and waiting for their attack. When he heard this, he asked admiringly if their plan was to use one of the squads as a distraction while the main group swam around the water and stabbed them in the back, to which he replied that it was. Realizing that Rakrak was taking the hardest part, Ur asked a little worriedly if they would be able to get to the island by water without being seen, to which he replied that they would, as the number of those who were able to fight had dwindled considerably and there were no more than 10 of them left. After a moment's silence, he added that while they were sailing to the island, he had discovered another blessing from the god. Then turning his gaze to the lake, which reflected the bright light of the moon, he said that their scales would shimmer in the moonlight as the water shimmered, making them much more invisible. Now that they had everything ready, all they had to do was get it over with once and for all. After a while, all hell really broke loose in the Frogman village. Rakrak's successful plan had worked, and the frogs were taken by surprise, and realizing that they could not win, began to flee in panic. However, not everyone managed to escape, because those who suffered from itching disease and had problems with breathing could not do it. The great leader Alroy was no exception, as he looked in despair and incomprehension at the lizards in front of him, who appeared as if from nowhere. The realization of what was about to happen to him brought a look of horror to his face. Soon the Lizardmen warriors arrived and reached his guards, who were left to protect him. But as it turned out, they didn't stand a chance against the strong and sharp spear-wielding lizardmen, who dispatched them in the blink of an eye. So fast that the frogmen didn't even have time to fire their bows at them. After killing all the guards, Rakrak looked at the lone Alroy with a cold stare. But even in such a situation, and having long since lost his dignity, he began to scream in despair, accusing the two-headed devil of not saving him, despite the sacrifices he had made. But his cries did not last long, for in the next instant the spear of the reluctant Rakrak was thrust into him. Thus ending once and for all the great leader Alroy, who despite his big name was nothing more than an empty man blaming others for his failures. At the same time, Shunan sat in his tent listening to the war cries of the lizards, as well as the panicked cries of his kin, with terror on his face. Shivering with fear, he pondered how it could have happened like this, and how their numerical and weapon advantage had vanished in the blink of an eye. Even the poison that should have been their trump card did not work on the lizards, who were somehow immune to it, but it was too late to think about it, because they had already lost. After a while the shouting and noise outside subsided. Deciding that this might be a good chance to escape, he cautiously peeked out of the hut to make sure that there was really no one outside. However, he didn't even realize that the danger was closer than he had imagined. Suddenly, a voice sounded behind him, causing Shunan to freeze in place with fear. The next moment he turned around in a panic, and at the same time, out of habit, he reached for his quiver, which unfortunately had no arrows left. Staring with his eyes wide with fear, he shouted the name of the lizard in front of him in desperation. It was Rakrak. Looking at him with a cold stare, he told Shunan if he was a warrior he should stand up and bear his sword, as it would at least allow him to keep his honor. However, the man had no honor now, and all he could do was just beg to be spared. He immediately panicked and started reminiscing about how they had strengthened their friendship over the last few times they had met, adding that he had no animosity towards the lizards. Rakrak asked thoughtfully if that was true, and he replied that it was, because it was the two-headed devil that had threatened them. Seeing that the lizard still seemed unconvinced by his words, Shunan pointed to his bow in a panic, saying he would reveal its secret. To which Rakrak indifferently and coldly asked what the secret was. He immediately replied that it was the bowstring. And when the lizard asked him what the bowstring was made of, he replied with a playful smile that it was made of veins from the backs of frogmen. Rakrak, like Owen, was really shocked at what he had heard, and his face immediately darkened, even though he had assumed that the bowstrings were made from some animals, he had never imagined that they were made from their kin. The next moment he asked Shunan, who was sitting in front of him with a smile on his face, what the bow itself was made of. The man, realizing what he was about to say, mumbled that it was from lizards. Shunan lowered his head and prepared to die, for he knew that after his words he would not be released. Rakrak heard the answer and replied in a cold and grim voice that he understood. Then opening the curtain at the entrance to the hut and looking out, he said that there were really no hard feelings between them, and he had already won a brilliant victory, so he accepted the deal he had offered. He then looked at Shunan and added that he was free to go. Shunan looked around warily and rose to his feet, still not fully believing that he was being let go. Not waiting for Rakrak to change his mind, he started to run away. Owen, who was standing next to Rakrak, asked him if he was really going to let him go. He took his bow and arrow and said yes. Then taking aim at the fleeing Shunan, he coldly added that all he needed was a moving target. Not long after the frogmen were finished, Rakrak's arrow whistled through the air. It hit the head of a bound, rotting, and long-dead frogman. Judging by the number of marks, it had long been used as a target for training. Now Rakrak was pleased with the result, his archery skills had improved greatly and their tribe had found a way to make bows as good as the frogmen. However, he just wondered if this was the best they could do. Even Owen, who had been watching the training, had noticed that the quality of this bow was just as good as the frogman's and its arrows flew just as fast and far. Rakrak explained to him that they had achieved all this by replacing the material of the bowstring with frogman tendons. But still, the lizards were physically stronger than the frogmen and could pull the bowstring tighter and risk breaking such a bow, so they should have found stronger materials. Owen understood his desire for a better weapon, but he still reminded him that the bows made by the frogmen were the best that could be made in this forest, there just weren't any better materials here. That's true, Rakrak said, nodding. Then I guess we can't just stay in this forest, then. Owen was smart, so he assumed that the reason for this decision wasn't just to make a better bow, and that was indeed the case. Rakrak explained to Owen that he had learned from the stargazer that this forest area would become very cold as winter came. The lizards would become physically weaker, but would still be able to survive the winter by making fires and wearing the skin of other animals. The problem, however, was their pet water buffaloes. Rakrak knew that in nature, water buffalo go to warmer places to avoid winter and find places with enough grass. And to solve this problem, some of them will have to go to warmer places to breed water buffalo further. You may have noticed by now that Owen had a skull on his head that was different from those worn by Rakrak warriors. There were no warriors among the grayish-brown scaly lizards, but there were definitely those that had the right qualities and abilities to become warriors. Rakrak had tested and selected them himself, and Owen was one of the gray lizards who had become warriors after passing several tests. These new warriors insisted on using frogman skulls rather than buffalo skulls, and Rakrak allowed them to do so. Rakrak continued practicing and shooting at the target, hitting one arrow after another. Finally he asked Owen about the results of today's hunt. He replied contentedly that he and his squad had wiped out the remnants of the frogmen hiding in the forest nearby. And now, thanks to their carcasses, there would be no shortage of materials for making bows. Rakrak was pleased to hear that. However, Owen still couldn't forget what had happened in the village. How he and the other lizard men, blinded by hatred and rage, had pursued and killed the unarmed and begging for mercy frogmen. Nothing seemed to quench their thirst for vengeance. And their last victim that night was Shunan, who had betrayed his tribe and revealed its secrets, and then tried to escape. It was not a pleasant memory, and he was brought out of it by Rakrak's question. He asked Owen what was bothering him. Owen replied that he would like to have Shunan or Ulroy's skull as a reward for helping him someday and asked that the skull not be damaged in training. Rakrak was fine with that and promised him that he would be sure to get his. Owen was grateful for that and decided to tell him about an interesting place they had discovered in the forest while hunting. Jael, meanwhile, came over and quietly leaned over the gray lizard cub who was watching the leader with an unusual figure in his hands. Jael asked quietly, interested in listening to the adults. She frightened the cub. He immediately burst into tears and let go of the figure. Then Jael asked him what he was doing here and what he wanted to ask the chief. Suddenly she noticed a figure lying on the grass. She picked it up and asked what it was. It looked suspiciously like the giant praying mantis that their god had sent to help them. Jael showed the figure to Rakrak and he also thought the figure looked like their divine protector. They all liked the way the figure was made and the chief even asked the cub if he had made it himself. Rakrak praised him, saying that the figure was nice and cute. Hearing this, the cub just glowed with happiness. And then he offered to keep the figure as a gift. But Rakrak was not sure whether it was worth taking the toy away from the child and looked questioningly at Owen. He replied that it was fine and he could accept the gift without any regrets, for the children of his village had been making a lot of them lately. It is even popular among them to exchange such figures. Hearing this, Jael asked the child if there were many children in their village who knew how to make such figures. And he answered her that yes. He explained that it all started because the protector had then saved them all on the island from imminent doom. Now all the children of their village thought of him as a good and powerful being who could protect them from any misfortune. Hearing this, Rakrak and Jael looked at each other. Rakrak realized that these figures could be very useful and decided to see how many had been made so far and buy them all. Owen offered to go to their village and see. Rakrak agreed. He was willing to use all his resources to get more of these figurines. He saw this as an opportunity to spread the belief in their unnamed bug god. But that would come later, for now Rakrak wanted to know what Owen's squad had found during the hunt. It turned out that while hunting the frogmen, they had found a strange structure inside one of the caves where some of the frogmen were hiding. It takes about half a day to get there from the lake and their squad killed all the enemies without much trouble, but the cave was a bit strange. Rakrak was immediately interested and asked what he meant. Strange in what sense? Owen explained that when they entered the cave, they noticed that there was another entrance that seemed to be carved into the stone. And he himself still doesn't understand how they were able to carve something into solid rock. So, he thought then that all should be told to the tribal chief first. It was the right decision and Rakrak decided to equip an expedition and explore everything with his own eyes. He returned to the village with Owen and Jael to take a group of warriors with him, and together with them he set off. On the way Owen advised them to be careful and cautious, for the frogmen were hiding there for a reason, and some of them might still be lurking nearby, preparing an ambush. Finally they came to the very same cave. As soon as they entered the cave, a blue butterfly appeared out of nowhere and immediately caught Rakrak's attention. While Owen assured everyone that they had cleaned up all the frogmen here and they could worry about nothing. They all froze in surprise as they stared at this slab of stone. Though Owen still didn't seem to understand what was so special about it. It was like a circular passage somewhere further into the cave, closed off by a man-made door made of carved stone. Looking at it, Rakrak marveled at how breathtaking it looked. And he didn't understand how such hard stone had been carved so precisely. Jael noticed something else interesting. The pattern on this stone was very similar to the one on the back of the giant scolopendra they had defeated in the desert. Now Rakrak himself realized it as well. Sunwon already knew that these were ancient ruins. He knew that there were many types of ancient ruins and in them one could gain ancient knowledge or discover relics and wonders. Among the ruins, there were some that had useful functionality, some were unique, but there were also demonic ruins that carried a lot of danger. Now while the level of development of his civilization was still low, even if they found ancient knowledge in the ruins, it would be of little use. Since his civilization simply wouldn't understand anything and wouldn't be able to use them. The situation was slightly different with miracles and relics. They allowed to create or change resources, and could also grant mystical blessings for civilization, but they had one disadvantage: they were fixed in one particular place and could not be transported in any way, which made them also not so valuable to the nomadic tribe. Still, in Sunwon's opinion, getting into the ruins wouldn't be so bad if they weren't demonic ruins. Apart from ancient knowledge, rank knowledge, secrets, demonic ruins, and unique ruins, players usually obtained other things that were categorized as miscellaneous relics. There could be piles of insignificant treasures, such as the golden tablet already obtained by Rakrak. This would have been of great value in the Middle Ages or a later era, but they weren't at that stage of development yet. So Sun Wun decided to wait and see what would happen, as it seemed that Rakrak's curiosity and boldness could lead to different consequences. He, watching Rakrak try to push back the stone door, thought that the likelihood of these ruins being unique was very slim. That they might be demonic and full of trouble was a distinct possibility. Finally the stone slab yielded under Rakrak's efforts. Immediately, a multitude of lightning bolts appeared, which formed a portal. It turned out that behind the stone slab was a portal to another world. Notifications appeared in front of Sun Wun congratulating him that his civilization had successfully discovered the ancient ruins. Finally, the system announced to him, "Welcome to the demon world."